Hey everyone, welcome to the AnexiPod, the official podcast for Anexinet. This is episode 9 for December 7th, 2016. I'm your host, Ned Bellavance, Enterprise Architect for Infrastructure Solutions at Anexinet, and heir apparent to the Niederlander fortune. Here on the AnexiPod, we talk technology for the enterprise covering infrastructure, app dev, analytics, and anything else that is shiny. On this episode, we will be talking about Windows Server 2016 and virtualization with Aidan Finn, Microsoft MVP in Cloud and Data Center Management. Aidan has been working in IT since 1996 as a consultant, systems administrator, and in technical pre-sales. Currently, he works as the technical pre-sales lead of a technology distributor in Dublin, Ireland, where he evangelizes and educates Microsoft partners about Microsoft technologies such as Azure, Windows Server, and Hyper-V. Welcome to the show, Aidan.
Thanks for asking me on.
Sure.
It's great to be here.
Great. So I mentioned a few things about you in the intro, but can you tell the listeners a little about yourself and how you ended up as a MVP in Cloud and Data Center?
Oh, God. Long story, I guess. So I, as you might tell from the accent, I'm not from America. I am actually in the Midlands of Ireland. And I started work in 96 actually as a programmer on Unix.
Okay.
And through all sorts of interesting circumstances, a couple of years later, I found myself doing consulting work on Windows NT. And, had a few different jobs doing that sort of work and, learning more about enterprise management, and then eventually found myself into the hosting business where I started working with Vmware and then moved to a different company, started working on Hyper-V, wrote a lot about things like System Center and Hyper-V, and eventually I got noticed by Microsoft and I was awarded MVP status. Originally for System Center Configuration Manager for my first year, and then switched over to Hyper-V because I'd been working mainly in the server space rather than the desktop space at that time, and felt it would be more useful for me to be in the Hyper-V world. I was working, with Hyper-V. Everything that was new, I was doing it because it made my life easier. So increasing the amount of automation we did, using Virtual Machine Manager as much as we could, monitoring everything with Operations Manager. It was a small company and we needed to automate a lot and be on top of everything. That was, our promise to our customers is we knew everything that was going on, and because we knew, you knew. So that was how it went, and wrote a few books over the years, wrote a couple of blog posts here and there, posted a couple of tweets. So, yeah, I think the only person who probably issues more angry tweets than me is Donald Trump. But yeah, and spoke at a few events over the years. Lucky enough to speak at things like Ignite and Tech Ed Europe. They're great fun to speak at because the scale of it is just so different to anything else you ever do. The pressure is just incredible.
Right.
But it's great fun. You get to meet loads of interesting people and get to talk to loads of interesting people, have conversations, and sometimes you teach, sometimes you learn. So it's been an interesting while.
Yeah, I was actually at Ignite 2016, and what a gigantic event that is. Just like you said, the scale is unbelievable. Yeah,
you go to your local conference or you go to a user group thing, and you guys in the States do massive user group events compared to what we do. But you go to something like Ignite, like I'd been to Tech Ed North America, and that was huge. Then you go to Ignite, and 23,000 people flooding the hallways at lunchtime. That's a whole different kind of big.
It's a logistical nightmare, but they pulled it off this year. I felt like it flowed really well, and I could get to all the conferences I wanted to. But yeah, just the walk from the hotel to the other end of the conference center was like 20 minutes easily.
But yeah, you should try the venue in New Orleans.
Oh really?
That's an interesting venue because it's one long hallway that goes about 2 miles long.
Oh wow.
The taxis actually park at either end, and they do bring people from one end of the conference center to the other.
That's not surprising.
Yeah, and with the heat outside as well, you don't want your hotel more than a block away from that place.
Right. So I'm someone who works with Microsoft all day, day in, day out, I can see the company is changing a lot. And, this is not Bill Gates or Steve Ballmer's Microsoft. It's a whole new kind of thing. What changes have you seen for better and for worse?
So for better, Microsoft are telling us more. Whether you're under NDA or you're out in the public, we know more about what's coming in the future. If you look at Windows Server 2016, we got that first preview build nearly 2 years before general availability. We'd never seen anything like that before.
Right.
And the feedback really did shape the product. We saw significant changes in, certain features, particularly like things like containers and how Microsoft were planning to manage containers primarily using PowerShell. And then we saw this huge shift to Docker because the container audience was all about Docker. So the massive amount of testing that was going on in the public, Microsoft are begging people for feedback. I spend a lot of time with the Azure guys, and they love having calls with people and learning about how people are using their products, what people want in the future, how people will really use features, not just, I want, but, what are you really going to use? Because they'll put the resources into that if you're going to use it. So that's very different to say how Microsoft was in the lead up to Server 2012 and Windows 8. They were a very different organization, very secretive, didn't want to tell anybody anything until, they made their their Apple-esque presentations.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought, they were going to get that same buzz as an Apple. And, really they weren't. Not then. It's different now with some of the hardware stuff, where they're excelling beyond what Apple can do. But very different. If you look at how they've embraced open source. And today, Microsoft is the single biggest contributor to open source if we base it on GitHub data.
Right.
They're bigger than number 2 and number 3 put together. That's a very different organization to 5 years ago where, they had one group of Linux developers who were in the corner of the Redmond campus. That was Linux. And, every now and then they'd write a management pack for System Center.
And now they're part of the Linux Foundation.
They're a director on the board. They're contributing hardware specifications to the Open Compute project, and it's not just they're contributing what they've already developed. The latest project, which is called Project Olympus, they're contributing what they've 50% developed because they want to see what other people think, and they want to get feedback before they actually lock down the specification and the contribution. This is a very different organization. And it was interesting you said it's not the Steve Ballmer Microsoft. No, he's not the CEO anymore. But from what I understand, he's the guy who initiated all these changes in his last year.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So he shook up the company in that last year of his time. So when he was getting ready to pass over the company, he did a major shakeup of how the organization was structured. So you don't see, for example, a team working on DPM and a team working on Azure Backup. They're one team. There isn't a team that works on vSphere replication to Azure and another team that works on Hyper-V Replica and another team that works on Hyper-V Replica to Azure. They're all one team. So they completely restructured to say, listen, we've got a set of skills. Let's just, have these skills work together rather than be different organizations that point fingers at each other. Just work together. So it's a very interesting new Microsoft. And you asked what I don't like. So I do like the fact that we get stuff fast. That's great. We don't wait 3 versions to get feedback turned into new features or new services.
Right.
But unfortunately, with that comes this fail fast approach, where the term is kind of funny. It's not what we think it is. The idea is they get stuff out there to see if it's wanted or not, and if it's not, you get rid of it. But they're getting us this functionality very, very fast. But I think sometimes we see quality dropping, and we've seen that with Windows updates, and we've seen the level of communication around Windows updates, drop to almost zero. Especially with these new cumulative updates where we have no idea what the contents are. So if something misbehaves, we've no control over it really, other than jump into the long-term servicing branch and don't get any updates. So there isn't really a middle ground. So I don't like that. Hopefully Microsoft will listen to the feedback, which is pretty overwhelming, to be honest, and maybe shift the policy a little bit so we get some communication on what's in the updates, and maybe change how updates are being developed in the QA process. They keep promising us that. We've yet to see the results that updates are more reliable, but maybe they're saying that this new process where they give us cumulative updates should improve quality. So I guess we'll know in about a year, and we've seen if our businesses are still running or not.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely noticed that they've been pushing out features like crazy, especially for the cloud stuff, which is great, but a lot of those features are a little bit broken when they first come out. And there's a whole, background community that's figuring out, oh, this doesn't broken, this doesn't work quite the way you would expect it to, or this works, but you have to wait or do this other little thing. And it'd be nice if it actually just all worked right out of the box. I don't know if that's just unrealistic of me.
I think they really want to see if people want to use stuff. Right. It takes a lot of human hours to make some of this software, and it's a big investment to say we're going to develop this particular feature based on this amount of feedback that we've gotten or these ideas that we have. So I think their idea is get something that's sort of functional out there and see what people think of it and what people make of it. And that's why you see some of these previews, particularly for the cloud. We saw Azure AD domain services in preview for, was that over a year? It must have been.
Yeah.
Got to the point where I actually in a presentation said, I don't think this thing's ever going to come out because it's been in. I actually was said that. I thought it's gone. I thought they were going to can it. And the following day, after I said that on a stage, they actually released a GA. So I look like a right fool. Won't be the first time, won't be the last. But I think they really want to get stuff out there, get functionality into people's hands. It may not be perfect. It may not have all the bells and whistles of the competitors, but get it out there, see if people want to use it. See if people want to use it the way we think they want to use it, and then evolve that feature or that service over time. So I can understand that, now that I'm peeking behind the curtain a little, and I'm able to see a little bit of how they work. So I can understand that approach that they've taken. It's not like the old days, when it took 3 or 5 years for a product to be released and you expect perfection. These days it's, we're going to have a large number of people work on something for a short amount of time and get it out there, see what you think of it. And if you like it, we'll continue working on it. And if you don't, we'll have a look at it. If it's something that's just not going to be useful, maybe we get rid of it. So I can understand why they're doing that.
And so Server 2016 is now GA, which is exciting. And I know clients and IT professionals I've talked to are putting it through its paces. So what are some of your favorite features that came out in Server 2016 that someone might want to explore if they're checking it out for the first time?
Oh, that all depends on where you are and how big you are and stuff like that, I guess. And even how you're approaching new systems.
Right.
So I think one of the things that a lot of us classic IT pros are struggling with is containers. And I've been thinking about this topic for a while. So containers, if you're not familiar with it, it's not machine virtualization, it's OS virtualization, where we're able to create different containers that each have their own unique sandbox that we can run on, and they share the underlying kernel. And then we have a variation of that called a Hyper-V container, where each container has a very stripped down single copy of a microkernel of Windows. So we have the secure boundary that we don't necessarily get with traditional containers from the Docker world on Linux. And the idea here is that we're able to deploy applications really quickly, and we're able to evolve applications and version applications extremely quickly from a library type system.
Right. And when you say quickly, you mean seconds or minutes.
Yeah,
not,
seconds.
Yeah.
To be able to say I have a new SQL server in seconds. I have a new WordPress farm in seconds.
Right.
And to have lots of these things running on a single operating system, which is something that Windows people just go, ugh. Lots of applications running on a single OS was a great way to end your career. It was going to go up in fireworks. So containers makes that possible, and it makes it very cost effective because single operating system, single machine, running lots of these tiny little installations of an application that are basically just differences from a library. What I like about this is it's somewhere between a halfway point between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So I've been thinking about platform as a service recently because of some of the migration stuff we're facing with getting people from enterprise agreements and open agreements onto CSP. And migration isn't, seamless in the Azure world. And I was thinking to myself, you know what? All these guys who are doing platform as a service and coding directly onto Azure, if they'd just done containers, we could have just lifted and shifted them.
Right.
They would have had that same cost effectiveness that they would have had from PaaS, but they would have had flexibility. And not only that, because containers are a universal format, there's nothing to stop them from saying, you know what, I like Azure and I like the containers and everything, but you know what, I need to hybridize completely because I don't want to have all my eggs in one basket. Why don't I move some of those over to AWS or vice versa? Or maybe lift and shift stuff from on-prem onto the cloud or any cloud. Right. And containerization would give you that because it's a universal standard. It's easy to move around. So I think that's very interesting. From the infrastructure side of things, there's no doubt about it. The ability to now do hyperconvergence from Windows Server 2016 using commodity hardware is very interesting. I know hyperconvergence is a big topic in the US. You guys really jumped onto it early with the likes of Nutanix.
Yeah.
And SimpliVity and Hypergrid, and there's a whole bunch of companies that got into that space using specialized proprietary hardware, which drives up the cost and makes you start wondering about the whole concept of HCI. You're told it's supposed to reduce costs and make things better and increase speed and all that sort of thing, and then you find, a single node is going to be $65,000. Sorry, that's an expensive node. Right. So where we can take a Dell R730 or a DL380 and put some slow disk and put some really fast disk into that thing and have maybe 2, 4, 8, 16 of those servers in a cluster, and no back end shared storage, no SAN, no JBODs on the back end. It's just using internal disk that's replicated across all of the systems. And it's hard to describe that redundancy and replication system. I kind of call it 3D redundancy, 3D tiering.
Okay.
Because there's just so much going on in so many different dimensions. The work that the Microsoft storage and high availability teams did on Storage Spaces Direct is just incredible. It's mind blowing. And it makes it very difficult to explain because it's so mind-blowing. But you're looking at, costs of a cluster coming way down because that big, meaty piece of a SAN, you don't need it anymore. Right. Storage space, I loved storage spaces and still do, but there's a lot of complexity there for people who are not, hardcore engineers. Those of us who spend a lot of time working on this stuff, we find storage spaces and scale out file servers and all that stuff easy enough. But when you are coming to that for the first time, that's difficult. We can just dump that SaaS layer now with Storage Spaces Direct and use internal disks with some good high-speed networking, and suddenly we have ourselves this fantastic system that's just Lego blocks.
Right.
So brand I work with is a company from California called Data On. And they have they're a fantastic company because they're storage nerds. Even their marketing people will blow most techies away. Yet they're scary to talk to because they know this stuff inside out. And they have an appliance. It's a 1U server with 8 NVMe disks in it. So NVMe is very fast flash storage. So where your classic SSD does 50 to 65,000 IOPS, NVMe does 450,000 IOPS.
Wow.
And with a 4-node cluster, they stress tested up to 2.4 million IOPS in a 4-node cluster.
And that would be like 4U because they're all 1U servers. Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's insane to think that something that used to take a rack of SAN is now 4 servers.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, I wonder how fast they could get with a 16-node cluster.
Right. And so that's all using storage spaces direct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's lots of very clever stuff going on. They're using persistent caching devices. So they're using NVMe as a persistent cache instead of using battery-powered RAM, because that has a risk of data loss. And most virtualization and database systems actually bypass that type of caching in the first place. So persistent cache is very beneficial. And then they're using the rest of the NVMEs as capacity devices, and they're doing. Imagine if you were doing RAID 10 and RAID 5 in the same LUN. That's what they're doing. Yeah, because they're able to do the reads and the writes. So for the active data to the RAID 10 piece or the mirrored piece of the LUN or the virtual disk, and then they're storing the colder data on the parity or the RAID 5 piece of the LUN.
Right.
And they're taking advantage of REFS version 3, which gives us all sorts of very clever metadata stuff for handling data and zeroing and block movement as well. So they're able, and leveraging RDMA networking means they're able to minimize the CPU overhead of actually managing the storage. So they're able to save that CPU for the virtual machine workloads and the applications running in them. So for me, that's kind of one of those cool nerdgasm type technologies.
Right.
There's lots of stuff in there, like the security types of solutions. So if you're working in private cloud or you're running public cloud, the new Host Guardian service, virtual TPM, so you can run BitLocker inside a virtual machine, so the tenant can be isolated from the administrators and the operators. So you can encrypt your machine so no one can mount your virtual hard disks. So HR finally stopped domain admins from looking at salary databases, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That seems to be the most common complaint out there. We don't want Windows admins looking at the salary database. Finally, they have a way of stopping it from happening. So there's a lot of things in there: storage replica, PowerShell Direct, so I can do PowerShell into a virtual machine without network access. Just enough administration and just-in-time administration, so we can really limit what rights you need inside of a virtual machine or a Windows server. Full stop. And then we can actually have just-in-time administration where you can request additional rights through MIM and either have it automatically approved or manually approved with logging. So there's all sorts of very cool things in 2016 where Microsoft looked at the challenges of today and tomorrow and said, okay, IT needs to be more flexible and they need to be able to control everything as well.
Right.
And we've got these conflicting objectives. Flexibility and control, really, they're opposing forces, and they tried to give us those things with 2016. And there's a lot in that OS. So, I'd say to someone, if you haven't had a look, have a look. Go to the user group events, have a look at the Ignite content. Plenty of webinars and podcasts out there talking about the content in 2016. Have a look, because there's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah, and with the fact that there's so much stuff in there, is there anything in Server 2016 that you feel is like half-baked and you'd counsel against, not using for a little bit until the next, update comes out?
The one piece, I don't think half-baked is the phrase I'm going to use here.
Okay.
The piece that I think is really interesting, but we don't have the deployment and the administration model yet, is the software-defined data center pieces. Okay. So we're talking about the software-defined networking and the layer above storage that Microsoft are bringing in or have brought in 2016. So this is where we can start doing Azure consistent storage. So we can start doing storage accounts and all that functionality, and the ability to deploy virtual networking, network security groups, and all that stuff that we get from Azure, all managed using a role in Windows Server called a network controller. Mm-hmm. So that stuff right now, you can deploy that and manage that using PowerShell if you want. And once you get out of the funny farm, you're going to realize that what you should have actually used was Azure Stack.
Yes. Yeah, Azure Stack technical preview 2 is out, correct?
Yeah. So Azure Stack still in development. And Microsoft are doing this very public preview process where they really want people to test this thing and play with it. It does need some beefy hardware. But Azure Stack is going to be out sometime in the middle of next year, we are told. And it's going to be on hardware that's delivered by Lenovo, HP, and Dell. Microsoft have very deliberately restricted the hardware because what they've learned from the past in large deployments and even small deployments is that the quality of the customer experience has been negatively impacted by OEMs. So people like Broadcom and Emulx and SanDisk, who've all introduced interesting firmware or driver issues, which have caused customer pain and headaches. So Microsoft wants to have a very high quality experience out there for customers. And what they're trying to avoid is, and this is a phrase I'm stealing from Jeffrey Snover, the chief architect of Windows Server, they want to avoid snowflake clouds. So they want to bring the Windows Server experience to the cloud, to say, listen, we want this thing to be fairly simple. We want it to be a cookie cutter. So when you go to Lenovo or Dell or HP and say, listen, I want a cloud, they wheel you out a cloud. And they say, here's your username and password, go have it, fun. Right. It's not one of these, let's do 6 months of talking about it and then we'll spend 12 months building it and we'll hand you over a document at the end and you'll be lost. They don't want that at all. They want to give you something that says, okay, we're going to wheel something in and you just start using it. So instead of you getting a server, you're getting, half a rack of servers or a quarter rack of servers, depending on what the final design will look like. So you're getting yourself this set of stuff and you start using the admin portal to deploy, the plans or that you want to make available to your tenants, and be they internal or external. And the goal here is that everything will be consistent with Azure. So we'll have Azure Resource Manager. So if you want to create applications using JSONs on-prem and then deploy them in test and dev in the public cloud, you can with those same templates, using the same virtual machine images from the Azure Marketplace through syndication. So you can actually bring those images from Azure down on-prem and have the exact same deployment and software development experience. This is something they've really thought out, from the high-level concept down to the nitty-gritty details. And this layer that sits on top of the network controller, software-defined storage, VXLAN, that will bring together the whole piece. So that will be the final piece of cooking, if you want to call it.
Okay.
They've mixed all the ingredients in Windows Server 2016, taking a lot of that stuff, including source code from Azure, and dropping it into 2016. Azure Stack will be that layer that sits on top of it. It'll be that cookbook that'll give us the last few steps, and make the whole thing, complete. So it'll be fully baked at that point.
Right. And I've actually played with Azure Stack a little bit, and like you said, it requires a beefy server to just get the POC. Right.
Yeah.
You need 12 cores, 96 gig of RAM, at least 4 blank disks that you can present. So not many people have that laying around. Fortunately, we did have a server that I could kind of Frankenstein together.
Yeah. Do your RAID 0 on your individual disks so you don't have RAID interfering with storage spaces and all that stuff.
Yep. And I only had 80 gig of RAM, so I had to edit an XML file to tell it that 80 gig was okay, which...
it wasn't.
It wasn't. It was fine at first, and then they just released all the PaaS services, so you can do SQL as a service, web apps, and MySQL. Yeah. I got through SQL, no problem. Started doing the web apps and didn't realize that spins up 7 additional VMs that require like 16 gig more RAM. And halfway through the deployment, it just completely failed. and for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah. I have a machine, and I literally ran out of time with the thing. I have a machine with I think it's 192 gig of RAM, and 16 cores, and I just ran out of time, unfortunately. Azure takes up so much time lately.
Yeah.
Customers want either training on it, or they want pre-sales on it, or meetings about it, or whatever. So that's most of my time rather than Azure Stack. But I'd say that'll probably change next year.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of interest from clients that are saying, I hear all the stuff about hyper-converged, but the thing that they feel is missing, and I agree, is that overlay, that administrative layer where you're not down in the grime. You're just providing that admin portal for them to do their tasks and be done with it.
That's something we should actually say about Azure Stack is it's not built on System Center like the old Windows Azure Pack.
Right.
This is literally Azure being brought down to Windows Server. Now, if you want to manage it with System Center, so manage the infrastructure, you can, but the actual system itself is not System Center. And it does not require a System Center. So this is a whole new experience that really is cloud-centric.
So riffing on that a little bit, one of the things I get asked really often is how does Hyper-V stack up against VMware, right? And we sell both, we deploy both, so I'm not saying one is necessarily better than the other, but a lot of people have kind of said, well, Hyper-V, that's just for dev. Like, I wouldn't put that in production. But I think they've reached feature parity at this point, and kind of branched out in their own ways. But I wanted to get your take on the situation, because I'm assuming you have worked with both as well.
Well, VMware is okay for running a couple of desktops on, but that's pretty much it. Somewhere somebody's just throwing a coffee cup at their monitor.
Yep. So
I'm biased. And have been for quite a while, and I'm not secretive about that. I think VMware have produced a fantastic virtualization platform, and they were the first to really master it. They probably have given people the best pure virtualization console in vCenter. I would say that in terms of pure virtualization versus VMM, I think VMware did a better job. And somewhere in Redmond, somebody's screaming right now.
I agree with you, though, that VMM has always been a little, confusing, is the word I would use.
So VMM tried to do a heck of a lot more than just virtualization management. So that's why I was very picky about my words there.
Yeah.
As pure virtualization management. VMM does a heck of a lot more. It's very hard to compare apples with apples between the Hyper-V stack and the VMware stack because the two companies approach things very, very differently. So Microsoft approached, infrastructure and application management one way. VMware went another way, and it's very, very difficult to do. Let's compare one feature with another feature at that layer. When you strip it back down just to the pure hypervisor layer, I think there's a couple of things that VMware do that Microsoft don't. But I think Microsoft probably do things better, in my opinion, at the higher end. When you start looking at their ability to offload to hardware and take advantage of things like RDMA. Mm-hmm. When I build a big host, there's a lot of RAM there. I want to live migrate or vMotion those virtual machines off. There's nothing that's going to ever be as fast or as efficient or as cost effective as SMB3 or DMA. The ability to start leveraging that stuff at high speed and to be able to vacate my hosts really fast so I can do planned maintenance, whether it's DIMM replacements because of a hardware degradation or doing Windows updates because it's that time of the month again. I'm able to get through that stuff very, very quickly. And Microsoft are leveraging that in all sorts of different ways. They're using it for storage networking. They're now using that same protocol for storage replica. So we can do block-based replication of LUNs synchronously or asynchronously, even over very long distances with some of the cool hardware from Mellanox. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where Microsoft have really set themselves apart in one way. And the other way is the pure hybrid cloud solution. VMware don't have a hybrid cloud solution. They've got a couple of racks in AWS.
Right.
Fantastic for them because they weren't able to build their own cloud solution because it was too expensive for them. They weren't able to do it at scale.
Right.
So I think VMware have kind of gotten stuck on focusing on pure virtualization. And I think Microsoft have, 10 years ago, Microsoft said, we're going cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was interesting if you look at the history of how Hyper-V was developed and how Azure was developed. Initially, they were two different forks. Azure was using something called Red Dog. Windows Server was using Hyper-V. But since 2012, Azure has been using Hyper-V. And they're now running a mixture of 2012 and 2012 or 2 Hyper-V, and probably starting to look at 2016 Hyper-V deployments across the globe, across their 34 regions, 100 plus data centers around the world, millions of hosts. So
right.
The thing scales. So Microsoft really, when you start looking at it and saying, what they've done with Azure and how Azure is now trickling down into Hyper-V, the security features that we've seen come down from the cloud, the management functionality, the possibility now where I can say I can run Azure on-prem or as a hosting partner through Azure Stack and give my customers that same experience as with Azure and give them that true choice about where do you want to deploy today. Do I want to run my databases on-prem, my application servers running on specialized hardware with a hosting partner, and my web front end and maybe my data pipes and whatever running, and my IoT stuff running in the cloud, because that's where the cheap scalability and the bandwidth is. I can do that and have the same management experience, and I can move my stuff between those different platforms. I can do my test and dev in one and my production on another and have the exact same experience. Use the exact same ARM templates for deploying my application. Whereas I just feel that VMware got caught up and stuck in the past with the whole Delaware thing, focusing on big old SANs and old-fashioned IT that's not cost-effective and not flexible.
Right.
And raving about their chocolate teapot features, like the ability to live replicate a virtual machine with one virtual CPU that can't be vMotioned. That sort of functionality doesn't impress me. If that thing could scale out to a machine with 12 terabytes of RAM and can be live migrated, fantastic. But yeah, so that's my biased opinion anyway. And 65% of your audience are now turning off right now.
Well, I hope not. And there's a lot of good lessons for VMware to still learn and improve. And I think their grab with AWS is part of that, is say, hey, we do have this sort of hybrid cloud solution since vCloud didn't work out so well. Time will tell if they could pull it off or if they need to focus on some of their core technologies and open them up a little bit more, like NSX and vSAN, and just, make their money that way.
Yeah. I think if I was taking over as CEO of VMware or whatever the hell Michael Dell is delegating or doing himself these days, I'd probably want to do a Steve Jobs on it, because anytime I've attended a VMware presentation, I'm lost. I have no idea what they're talking about in terms of all these products. There's a lot of products, and sometimes it feels like that 20 of them all do the same thing, and it's very, very confusing. And I think they need to rationalize quite a bit and say, this is our core product, or our core solution. This is our hybrid cloud solution, and this is what you do. Where I go onto the VMware site, and I'll be quite honest, I've been looking at some VMware licensing for the lab, because the Azure story, because Azure integrates very well with VMware these days. Microsoft like everybody's money equally, and I've been looking at the VMware store trying to figure out, okay, what is it I need in the lab, and the confusion level is just. It's crazy. It's very difficult to understand what they have. If I was them, I would sort that out. That's what Steve Jobs did when he first joined Apple. He got rid of almost everything and said, we make these three things. And if I was VMware, I would do that. Really spend a lot of time with AWS making nice with them.
Right. Yeah, I see a lot of companies trying to refine what they do and just being really good at a few things, like HP split into HPE and HP and then started selling off chunks of their business that they didn't think were useful or weren't focused enough, so they got rid of their services department and some other stuff. And they're like, we are infrastructure hardware. That's what we do. That's what we're going to put all of our focus and attention on. I feel like Dell and EMC are kind of the opposite of that. We can make everything for everyone and make everyone happy.
And we make 6 of them.
Yes, and we make 6 different of the same thing. And you get to pick which one you want. And maybe they're all home runs, but it seems unlikely, right?
Yeah.
And now that VMware's tied up in that mix, I don't see them necessarily rationalizing their products anytime soon.
It's a pity, because they certainly have a great core product.
Yes.
And it'd be a pity if Microsoft lost a competitor that kept them on their toes, because I think that's important. Like, even for me being biased towards Microsoft, I want them on their toes, because that's what keeps them innovating. That's what keeps them from making bad decisions. Or hell, that's not a good phrase. But it would keep them honest,
right?
And keep them going the right direction. And as soon as they go a wrong direction, realize we need to go backtrack and fix this. When you lose competition, you become the only player in town. You get stagnant, and we've seen that in the past in the industry.
Yeah, once that complacency sets in, the rot just kind of seems to begin as well.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Well, I guess we'll see what happens. So stop beating up on VMware. I hope they're not too mad at me at this point. I still like your products, guys.
Don't worry. Your partner status isn't damaged.
I got my VCP 6. Don't worry. We're all good. So I know you recently attended the MVP Summit in Redmond, and I'm sure there's a bunch of NDA stuff that you can't talk about, but is there anything interesting or exciting that people should keep an eye out for?
Oh boy. The first rule of MVP Summit is you don't talk about MVP Summit. Pretty much almost everything is covered by non-disclosure agreements the MVPs have with Microsoft.
Right.
That's why they are quite open with us, is because they know that we can be trusted. What I'd say is the theme wasn't that different to Ignite, but that won't breach any NDAs. Hybrid cloud is real. You'll see a lot of people in the media who are journalisty types or business consultants who will tell you that hybrid cloud isn't real, and they'll use lots of fancy words to back up their opinions. If you're working out with customers, that they've stuff that they want to move to public cloud, and they have stuff that they will never move, or stuff that just doesn't fit the public cloud model, and that happens.
Right.
And that's where hybrid cloud really works. And the lesson that Microsoft wanted people to learn at Ignite was that hybrid cloud is more than just a network connection. It's a way of working. It's the tools that you work with. It's the platforms that give you that consistent experience. The tools that we use in the cloud to supplement what we have on premise. And a lot of people have fear about the cloud because they see it as outsourcing. It's not really, unless you're a disk monkey. At that point, you are being outsourced. But anyone working from the OS up, you're not being outsourced.
Right.
In fact, you're probably more valuable than ever because you're doing less of the donkey work and more of the actual adding value to the business work. Work becomes more interesting, things become more valuable. And you see that with a lot of the security stuff that the likes of Brad Anderson was talking about on day one at Ignite, where we have all these different integrated solutions that you pick and choose which ones you want, and they'll guard your email, they'll guard your documents no matter where they go, they'll monitor your desktops, they'll look for 0-day threats coming into your email, and you have this centralized view, the ability to track everything. That hybrid cloud story, it's real. If you're scared of the cloud, get over yourself. Because if you don't, to be honest, you're not going to have a job for much longer, unless you're in government, and then you're sorted. And the reality is, you need to learn. And I've spent a good bit of the last nearly 3 years learning now. I did a major shift January nearly 3 years ago where I had to start learning Azure because I was told we're going to start selling Azure.
Right.
It's not all, on-prem is just going to take care of itself these days. And it kind of does. There isn't much sales effort in selling Windows Server. It just sells. It's the default platform for a lot of customers. So people just buy it. So the Azure side of things, definitely look at it. If you're in the desktop management and security, look at the EMS bundle. There's a lot of learning there. A lot of cool stuff that solves problems you've been battling with for 10 years and more.
Right.
Monday morning password hell doesn't have to be anymore. It really doesn't. Yeah. All those horrible procedures you've got about granting users access to file shares, that stuff can disappear. The paperwork can go. It can be the business owner has a simple little place to actually do that for themselves. You don't need to give the Chinese military access to your infrastructure to do multi-factor authentication anymore. You can actually do it using Active Directory.
Right.
And you can do it with SMS on Android and iOS. And Lord help you, Windows Phone if you have it.
Even
Microsoft and Microsoft have a very cool app as well, so you can get that fob type experience using an app on your phone, so you don't have the vulnerabilities that SMS apparently has. So there's an awful lot of stuff in there. If you're struggling with DR, have a look at Azure. Replicate your vSphere virtual machines or your Hyper-V virtual machines to the cloud. If you're in a small business, have a look at Server 2016 Essentials. Look at how that makes DR easy from a wizard. Same with Azure Backup. Lots of businesses are struggling with the cost of backup. When you can say, listen, I can do backup to the cloud for 2.4 US cent per gig, and that's the starting price. That's some cheap backup. And the cost of storage in the cloud is only ever coming down. That's the great news, because it's all software-defined storage. It's cheap commodity hardware with lots of redundancy and clever stuff going on at the software layer. There's a lot of things there to be learning that you can add skills to your CV or resume. You can add value to the business and innovate and start solving some of these problems that the C-level people have with IT. And you can be that creative person, that adaptive person that's able to be more innovative, be more flexible, and bring solutions to the business rather than the business knocking on your door going, why is everything taking so long? Or why are we being sued because, we lost 50,000 passwords 5 years ago and didn't tell anyone about it. You can control all that stuff these days.
Right. Yeah, and I can echo all of that with the work that we've been doing out in the field. EMS has been huge. Azure deployments have been huge. Azure Site Recovery, once we get in and start talking to clients about it, they're like, I can do what? I can just replicate it to Azure, and I don't have to pay a gazillion dollars to do it. It's like, it really is that simple. And
it's actually really easy. Just don't tell the customer that if you're in the services business.
It's been fantastic. And putting it in ASR is supposed to be coming for cross-region for Azure as well, so it'll just be baked into the whole suite. I'm hoping that's going to be in preview soon. But just all the things that you're talking about are things that I see us rolling out and teaching our clients about all the time. Hopefully the IT professionals at our clients are taking notice and learning and ingesting this stuff rather than just hiring us to do it, because as much as I like doing something the first couple of times, once I've done it a few times, I'm ready to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. There's a lot out there. It's fine. I think for most businesses, what I've found is the hybrid type things like ASR and backup, and some of the desktop and device management solutions, security solutions. Those are the things where you can have an instant impact on the business. Azure running or migrating workloads in the cloud, that's a more difficult one because it's cloud scale, so it's not really suited to lift and shift, I find. Mm-hmm. When people do the numbers and say, let's lift and shift and see how much it'll cost, I think they'll find that they're cheaper staying on-prem with their existing styles of deployment.
Right.
With modern cloud-style applications, where you're leveraging that army of ants concept instead of a platoon of giants. That's where you get the cost effectiveness of the cloud. So that's where a bit of that cloud transformation topic from Ignite that Microsoft have been talking about in the last few months, where you have to transform how you design applications, how you deploy, how you code. And it doesn't have to be Microsoft coding, because Azure is all about the open source world. I think they're talking about 60% of current deployments are Linux, and was it 30 or 40% of all virtual machines are Linux?
Is it up to 60% now? Because I know it was hot getting. It was like 50% before, but it just seems to keep rising.
Yeah, the number it's just pure. It's the proof of the openness of Azure. It's not Windows Azure anymore, and hasn't been for a long time.
Right.
There's a heck of a lot more Nix stuff supported on there than Windows stuff. When you start looking at how much of the actual fabric is actually open source as well, the switching is open source. Hadoop for HD Insight, the data lake stuff, all of that is based on open source, with Microsoft contributing their code back into the community again. Even the hardware is open source. It's a whole new world that's very, very interesting, and kind of, if you're a nerd, there's a lot of cool stuff to read about, and it just doesn't stop, to be quite honest.
Right, yeah. There was a time when all the new excitement was around VMware and virtualization, all that, and I feel like the excitement now, at least for me, is reading about what Microsoft's up to and the new things that are rolling out of their data centers.
Imagine if you were a kid coming out of college with a computer science degree today, or a maths degree, and you start reading about all this stuff about machine learning and HD Insight. And, just think of the dollar signs you'd be just seeing. The opportunities now, if you were coming out, versus when I came out in '96. I came out and I was like, okay, you can do a little bit of coding in VI and then compile it, and it spits out a number, and yay, you're done.
Right.
Versus today, with the stuff we can do with IoT, with machine learning or artificial intelligence, if we use the verboten term, it's just so much cool stuff that you could do. If I was 21 or 22 again, I'd say, you know what, I'm going to stick with development instead of dumping it and switching over to that infrastructure thing.
Right.
Because the whole new world of the cloud is just, it's very exciting.
Yeah, I think I would be a data scientist, because that is just in crazy demand right now. Everybody wants a good data scientist, right?
Get yourself a nice job working remotely for Wall Street.
Yeah. Well, if only we had a time machine, right?
Yep. If we could send a letter back to the mailbox in the past.
So, speaking of time machines, my last question, I like to ask this for everyone, is what is your favorite 80s movie?
Oh, wow. Does Return of the Jedi count as an 80s movie?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Either that or Gremlins. Either that or Gremlins.
Oh, that's a good choice, too.
Yeah. So I preferred Gremlins 2 over the original Gremlins.
Yeah, it was a little saucier. It was a little more fun.
Yeah, that probably is a 90s movie, was it?
It might be. It still fits.
It's old enough.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Aidan. If people want to know more about you and what you do, where can they find you on the internet?
They can find me on aidanfinn.com. It's my own blog. I also write for petri.com, the Petri IT Knowledge Base. You can find me as @Joe_Elway. Do not ask.
Okay.
And yeah, that's where you'll find me writing and blogging and tweeting and ranting at crazy hours of the day and stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much.
No problem at all.
And that was our interview with Aidan Finn. A couple quick notes about the podcast. If you've been listening for a bit, you may have noticed that the podcast is now just an interview with a special guest. The news and rant portions of the podcast have been rolled into their own bi-weekly podcast called Buffer Overflow. On Buffer Overflow, two Anexinet colleagues and I discuss what's new and interesting in the IT newsphere. We've got 2 episodes out already, and they are a lot of fun to record and listen to. You can subscribe from the iTunes podcast directory, and I'll put a link in the show notes. AnexiPod is also in the iTunes directory, so why not subscribe to both while you're there? Thanks to Catherine and Patty for helping me pull this together. Thanks to Lee Rosevere and Professor Click for providing the music for AnexiPod. Thanks to Anexinet for helping me produce this podcast. If you're looking for a company to help you with your digital, strategy, or technology needs, then I would recommend reaching out to Anexinet to see how they can help. And finally, thanks to you, dear listener, for tuning in. Without you, I would be a lunatic talking in a room to myself. If you'd like to know more about me and what I am up to, you can check me out on Twitter at Ned1313 or my website, nedinthecloud.com. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, IT moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it.